to have you. We got lots of people online here, and we got lots of people out there in Dallas trying to stay warm. And I had no idea that I would ever have a problem flying into. I had no idea I'd have a problem flying into Dallas, Texas because of weather. I thought I was going to be able to take a break from the winter in Utah and be able to come to Texas with some shorts and t-shirt, but apparently I packed my down coat and didn't end up even making it there because of the cold weather you guys are having. So I apologize that I made it to Texas, but not to Dallas. So I'm in Houston, and we're coming to you on a webinar this morning. So we will have to reschedule and maybe come out there in person next month. But unfortunately, I'm not able to be there in person this morning. But I am still, nonetheless, extremely excited to talk to you about this really fun, not super serious, but this really fun topic of a 401 condo versus a 401k. So this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited to go over this information. I think you're going to learn a lot. I've got Jim and Kirti there on the other line and watching the questions. So please, if you have any questions, please go ahead and post those in your little GoToWebinar control panel there. You can also raise your hand if you would like. If you would like to be unmuted, just maybe put a comment or a question that you would like to talk. We can make this very open and informal and try to make it as if we were there in person. So please feel free to ask any questions as we go. I'm excited to have everyone online and have everyone there at Jim and Kirti's, and we're excited to go over this fun topic. My name is Lance Morgan. I have been in the financial education and financial services industry for about 10 years, and I love thinking outside the box. One of the things that we do and one of the things that we help people do with their money is think outside the box. And so today with the 401 condo, we are definitely going to be doing that. And so I'm just going to dive right into it. And the first thing that I want to talk about before we dig into the details of this 401 condo versus a 401k, I want to talk about some things to set the stage here. Number one, you'll see that there are three things that I think everyone needs to know about money and how the investments that they have are affected by these three things. And so the first one is taxes, and then we'll talk a little bit about the impact of loss. Now, fees are going to be very specific to what it is that you're using as an investment vehicle, so we won't go into those today, but please make sure that you get the details of that when you are looking at different options. And one of the things that we can do, of course, is help people compare by analyzing all that. Then I'm going to go over the two biggest mistakes that people make with their money. I've been doing this for 10 years, and without question, these are the two things that I've seen that people make with the two biggest mistakes people make with their money. And we will go over that. And then, of course, all this will kind of lead in to how this applies to a 401 condo versus a 401k. So the first one is taxes. So real quick, we have to understand how taxes are affected by how taxes affect our investments. This here is a tax history in our country going back to 1913, and this talks about some of these ups and downs we've had. We've got the stock market crash down here. We've got also, if I turn on the events here, you can see all these different events that happened. Stock market crash. We had the Great Depression following that. Some really interesting time frames here, I think, is in 1941. You were being taxed at about 81% if you were making over $5 million, which, of course, a lot of people were making over $5 million, and so that might have been, I don't know, the Rockefellers and the Carnegies or something, not very many. But what's interesting is a year later, in 1942, they increased the upper tax bracket to 88%, and they lowered the threshold. We call that casting a wider net. They lowered it to $200,000. So now you're going to get taxed at 88% over if you're making over $200,000 for the upper income tax bracket. Now, if we fast forward time, we come all the way over here, we have the 70s over here when we were still being taxed at a very high tax bracket of in the upper tax bracket of over 70% or 70% there if you're making over 200,000. So that's when they started to petition for a tax break. They really wanted the government to be able to give their upper income executives a tax break. And at the time, they had a pension that was going to cover about 80% of their income, but they needed something that allowed them to save some money and postpone some taxes until later to supplement that pension, maybe to make up 20 or 30% of their income in retirement. And then you had the IRA and the 401k were born during that time frame. The first 401k went into effect in 1981, and the whole idea behind the IRA and the 401k as it pertains to taxes was to be able to kick the can down the road to a lower tax bracket. And that's exactly what happened to those executives. Now, a funny thing happened, however, is that these corporations thought, man, I really like this 401k idea because these pensions are super expensive. So large corporations started getting the idea that maybe if they promoted these 401ks a little bit more, they could get out of the pensions that were costing them so much. The other thing that happened is that that's about the same time, the early 80s and the late 70s were about the same time that they came out with mutual funds that allowed the average investor to participate in the market without having to buy individual stocks. And so that really changed things. And Wall Street invested in untold millions of dollars to promote the 401ks because they were a great vehicle to move a lot of mutual funds. And so it was a great marketing push, and 401ks became really popular. So we saw this teeter-totter effect where corporations and 401ks, or corporations and Wall Street were really promoting these 401ks. Now, what else is interesting about this is how this applies to taxes. Now, if I were to ask any of you, if you were, and you can, if we were in person, or if we had some interaction here, if I were to ask any of you, if you came to me and asked me for a loan, and I said, sure, I'll give you a loan, you're probably going to want to know a couple things about that loan. The two things are, you're going to want to know the interest rate and the terms when you have to pay it back. What if I said, I'm doing pretty well financially right now, and so I don't really need money, but what if we could wait until later, until I needed money, and then when I got desperate and needed money, what if I could decide what interest rate I wanted to charge you on that loan? Well, we laugh and we think, no way am I ever going to take that loan. But what's funny is that that's the deal that we have with the IRS when it comes to our 401ks, our IRAs, our SEPs, Simples, all these qualified plans, because we now have, we basically are still kicking the can down the road saying that I will pay taxes later. The question is, am I going to pay them at a lower tax bracket, or am I going to pay them at a higher tax bracket? That is the big question. So we are not actually in control, and that is something that could affect us. Now, let's say you're already retired. I know some of the people on the line here are already retired. Well, that doesn't really change anything, because if you're already retired, there are still some things you can do to maybe change how that money that you're spending is being taxed, because you're still kicking it down the road. So even if you're 60, 70 years old, you still could be kicking the can down the road for another 20, 30 years. And so we still need to do some planning with taxes as it pertains to your money. And so all I'm saying, and I hope I have to do a little disclaimer before I get too far into this, just to let you know that I am not giving tax advice, but I am also not dissing on 401ks, and I'm not saying that they are bad with all of this. I'm just saying that we need to sometimes think outside the box, and we need to understand how they work, and we need to kind of go into these situations eyes wide open. So there's nothing wrong with them, because we could possibly be kicking the can down the road to a lower tax bracket, but we just need to understand that we are not going to be that we do not know where we are heading into the future. So right now, if you are in a 30% tax bracket and you have some money in a qualified plan, like let's say $100,000, you actually only own about 70% of that. And in the future, As it stands today, the IRS will take about 30% of that. What I'm bringing up with all of this is if taxes go up in the future, then that means a bigger portion of your money goes to the IRS. And if we were to turn on the average line is pushing 60%, and if taxes went up to even what the average line is, then there's a very good chance that the IRS could actually own more of your investments than you actually own, which is definitely a little scary thought. But that's one thing that we need to understand about taxes, because that can affect your money a lot more than rate of return. So you're probably not going to hear me talk a whole lot about rate of return, because to me there are several other factors that that you need to consider before we even get to the rate of return. The other thing I want to bring up in another topic of taxes is how we compound that interest. So let's say we have money sitting in an account or in a stock portfolio that is growing, and let's say it's growing at 6%. Now, one of the things that we do is we help people to get a safer, better return on their money, but we won't get into the details of the different products today. We're talking a little bit more high-level concepts, but let's just say we're getting 6% for sake of argument right now, and let's just say that we're in a 30% tax bracket. Well, out of that $100,000, every year I am actually paying taxes on that money, on the growth of that money, if my money is not in a qualified plan. One of the benefits of a qualified plan is that we do get tax-deferred growth. And so in a non-qualified plan, if our money is just being taxed every year, depending on whether it's short-term or long-term capital gains, then we could be potentially paying 30% in taxes. What that means is that out of that growth on our money, we are actually paying some of that in taxes. Now, it's not just one of the things we always talk about is opportunity costs. It's not just the $23,000 you've had to pay in taxes out of your pocket. It's what that $23,000 could have earned if you would have invested it at that 6%. So that's where we come up with this lost opportunity cost. So what this is actually showing us is over a 20-year period of time, if we had to pay $66,000 in taxes over that time frame, and we could have invested that, then we would have lost an additional $33,000, which means that even though it appears that our $100,000 has grown to $320,000, if we subtract the lost opportunity cost and the taxes, then we're actually only a net gain of about $221,000 on our money. All of this is very important to understand when it comes to dealing with your investments. And so when we go back here to the three things that I think everyone needs to know about their money, the first one is taxes. Now, the second one is the impact of loss. If I could offer everyone on this webinar a 25% average return, would that solve a lot of your problems? Now, the answer would probably be yes. And so let's go and look at what a 25% return would look like if we factor in losses. So let's say you give me $100,000, and in year one, in order to get you a 25% average return, in year one, I lose 50% of your money. Now, a lot of people are probably a little concerned right now that I've just lost 50% of your money, because now you started at $100,000, but you're now down to $50,000. But never fear, I promised you a 25% average return. So never fear, I'm going to get you that 25% average return, because in year two, I'm going to get you a 100% return. Now, a 100% return sounds like a killer deal. And of course, down 50 up to 100 is 25%. So I successfully got you a 25% average return. The problem is that when you lost 50% of your money, you were down to $50,000. So when you got that $100,000 return in year two, it was only on $50,000, which means that your actual return is zero. All I did was get you out of the hole. Okay? So what that means is that the more you lose, the more you have to gain just to get back to even. We call that math versus money. Mathematically, it is a 25% average return, but actually, it's a 0% gain. Now, let's say the market went down 50% and then up 50%. Now that is a 0% return or a 0% average return, but you're actually down 25% on your money. Now let's talk about how that relates to real estate. In real estate, if a home was worth $100,000 and then the market dropped like it did in 2008, for example, and it was only worth $50,000 during 2008, let's say, but then it rebounded after that and came back to being worth $100,000. Well, that's a little bit different than our money because it's now worth $100,000 again. But a down 50, up 50 in this particular scenario, you're actually down 25% on your money. So just some things to consider, and it is, nice to look at this to be able to kind of come into this eyes wide open. Okay, so like I said, hypothetically, have we ever lost? This was a hypothetical example, but have we ever lost 50% on our money before? We actually have a couple of times. In 2000 to 2002, we lost about 46% top to bottom. So during this time frame, we were down on our money. So a dollar, if I started with $1 prior to 2000, at the end of 2000, because of the ups and downs and everything else along the way there, at the end of the day, my $1 would have turned into 60 cents. Okay? Now, 26% return, just like I gave you a 100% return a minute ago, 26% return is a great rate of return. Everyone was extremely excited in 2003, but we only got 26% return on that 60 cents, which put us up to 76 cents. And then the good return in 2004 was still, in 2005, they were still just trying to get us out of the hole. And a great return again in 2006, once again, just got us out of the hole. And in fact, we're talking 7 years later, after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of positive returns, we finally got our dollar back. So we are right back to where we started. Now we finally got that dollar back 7 years later, and what happened next? A lot of you were around to remember this, and you might have even had money in the market during this time frame. But in 2007 and in 2008, from top to bottom, it was 56%. It started in 2007 and ended in 2008, and it was 56% top to bottom. So boom, there goes our dollar again, back to 60 cents, 61 cents. So all these good years, once again, bouncing out of that bottom, just like we did in 2003, we bounced out of the bottom, and in 2009, we bounced out of the bottom. But we were just trying to get that dollar back again. And so how does this compare to real estate? Well, we're going to get to that in a second, but what I want to point out before we get into that, I want to point out that if we look at these 15 years in the stock market from 2000 to 2014, the average return was 4%, but I just showed you a minute ago that the average return means absolutely nothing, because I could advertise a 25% average return, and if my actual return wasn't, the same, then it wouldn't really matter. All I care about is the actual return. So in the last 15 years, if your money was correlated or benchmarked with the S&P 500, top 500 of your top companies, you are literally going to have had, in the last 15 years, a 2.2% net gain on your money. And so we are going to compare that to real estate and see which one you would prefer and where you would rather have your money. But hopefully you can see that there is definitely a big difference between average return and actual return, and there's also an impact of losses, because when we have the ups and downs or the roller coaster rides of the market, it can significantly impact our money. Okay, now, like I said, we won't be able to get into fees on this webinar today because of time and the fact that, those are specific to each individual account. But I do want to talk real quick about the two biggest mistakes people make with their money. Now, this here is a picture of what a lot of people's financial situation looks like. We all have this earned income that comes to us through this big old tank called our lifetime capital potential. Even those that are retired, that are collecting Social Security and maybe some pension money if you're lucky, and maybe they're spending their 401k now, all of that, even Social Security, that's all coming to you in what we call monthly cash flow. So that's your monthly cash flow. Now, those of you who are already retired have already done this, but you're going to need to pump some of that money during your earning years. You're going to need to dump some of that monthly cash flow into your investment tank and into your safe tank. And that, of course, is what we're going to use for later. And then, of course, we have this expense that we've just talked about, one of the biggest expenses you're ever going to have in life, which is the tax filter. And then we're going to, of course, spend through our current lifestyle, and then that money that we spend will be gone and gone forever, okay? So what that looks like is this, filling up that tank so that later on when we no longer have monthly cash flow, we can open up those valves and we can live on what we have put into these tanks. Now, I spoke earlier about these qualified plans where we get to bypass this initial tax filter. A lot of people think that a 401k saves them money. Is that true? Yes or no? No, it does not save them money on taxes. It simply postpones taxes until later. So if you have a 401k as part of your investment tank, the red represents that belonging to the IRS. We just looked at that a minute ago. Part of that is not yours. A lot of times I ask my clients, how much money do you have in your 401k? And they say, oh, I've got about $100,000. Not true. They only have, depending on their current tax bracket, they only have a portion of that. The IRS controls or owns the other portion of it. So you actually have a partner on that investment deal. Now, that money does, however, bypass that initial tax filter, but when we go to drain that and take that out of the tank, it still has to go through that tax filter. So once again, it is simply postponing the taxes until later. Now, I mentioned that the biggest mistake that people make is not having access to their money. And so we come over here into our safe tank, and we build up a nice little accumulation into our safe tank. And then the second mistake people make with their money is they interrupt that compound interest and they drain it. Okay? Every time you need to fill that back up and then drain it, every time you fill that up and then drain it, which is all of you who have learned from your parents and grandparents, and I commend you for learning how to save and not get into debt. That is a good thing, and that is step one in what we want to teach people. But as you save, like your grandparents taught you, as you save and build up some money in that savings tank and then spend it and then save and then spend it, every time you do that, you have to run your money through the tax filter again. So every time you need to fill that tank back up, you go through that tax filter, which is not a super efficient way to be saving your money. Now, one of the things that we like to teach people is how to build that money up in the safe tank. And there are ways that you can actually get a good, safe, conservative, let's just say 6 to 8%. And of course, it depends on some factors, but it is safe and it is guaranteed to not lose. And it's through some indexing strategies that we use that gets you up to 15% in the market with a minimum of at least 0.25 on the downside. So that averages out anywhere from about 6 to 8% depending on the time frame that you're looking at. So let's say that we could get a 6% return in this savings tank. Now, when it comes time to actually spend money for all of these unexpected lifestyle events, or some of them are expected, but we do have to buy cars. We do need to go on a vacation here and there. Maybe we have some kids that need to go to college, okay? And maybe, of course, we just have different entertainment and stuff. And then, of course, our favorite that we're going to talk about today is a house, maybe a condo, maybe a cabin, something that we cannot pay for through monthly cash flow, but we would like to pay for it. Now, I have two options. I could come over here and I could interrupt the compounding of my 6% over there, and I could pay cash. I always like to ask people, how do you pay, do you finance things? Oh, I don't finance things. I always pay cash. Well, you actually do finance things if you pay cash, because you self-finance if you pay cash. In fact, if I interrupted the compound interest of my safe tank there that was earning 6% and I paid cash, then I self-financed that purchase at 6%. I didn't finance it through a bank, but I financed it through myself, at 6%. Once again, I always ask people, if you could buy a house with cash, would you do it? And everyone always says, yes, absolutely. That would be great. And then I say, okay, does Donald Trump pay cash for his real estate? And just as quickly, people say, oh, no, heavens no. Donald Trump wouldn't pay cash. He would use other people's money. So I often ask people, if they have any debt. And a lot of people say no, and they proudly say they don't have any debt. But does Donald Trump technically have debt? Does he have mortgages, and does he have loans on some of his real estate? Yeah, absolutely. And yet he calls it leverage. See, what's funny, I think, about the conversation of debt is that wealthy people call it leverage. In fact, in several books, anytime you read about how to get rich, everybody's always talking about OPM, other people's money, and OPT, other people's time, and OPR, other people's resources. You hear all these things, and you've probably maybe heard of books like Zero Down, and how to start businesses and invest in real estate with zero down. These are all strategies that the wealthy people have been implementing for years and years of using other people's money. However, there are equally as many people out there training and writing books about getting out of debt and how debt is evil and don't get into debt. Well, that's the big debate. Is it debt or is it leverage? Well, let's look at that. So this is for Jim and Kirti, because this is Kirti's favorite screen. And I think it's one of my favorite screens as well, because it really helps to visualize this. If we go into debt, a debtor starts at zero and he ends at zero. He starts with nothing and he ends with nothing. He always goes into debt. He borrows money and he pays interest to others for the use of their money. And he tries to get out of debt and get back to that zero line, but he just keeps going into debt and getting out of debt and going into debt and getting out of debt. That is debt. Okay? Now, the saver delays gratification. The saver is able to wait and save and accumulate money and then pays cash. However, while they were saving, they were earning interest. Now, those of you investing in a bank, in a savings account, earning less than 1%, this might not be that big of a deal. But if we could show you how to save and invest at even 4, 5, or 6% on a low end, you are still financing or self-financing your purchases when you pay cash by giving up the interest that you could have earned. So what do the wealthy do? What does that look like in a graph format or in a visual format? Well, the wealthy people understand that you don't interrupt compounding. Compound interest works best over time. So if you don't want to interrupt your compounding, and if you don't want to reset or interrupt, I should say, if you don't want to interrupt the compounding by draining the tank, then what you would do is you would let your tank continue to grow, and then you would simply use other people's money and borrow their money to pay for those investments or those unexpected expenses. Let's say you're in between jobs and you just need a few months to survive. Well, then you could go in, borrow money using your money as collateral. That is the most important thing, is to understand how collateral works. A lot of times we'll use our house as collateral when we get a mortgage, or we'll use our car as collateral when we buy a car. Sometimes we can use some really good credit. If we have really good credit, we can use our credit as collateral for a loan at the bank. But let's say that we don't have good credit, we're in between jobs, and we're trying to invest in some crazy, investment or this crazy invention that nobody wants to give us money for. It doesn't matter what you need the money for. If you have money that you can use as collateral, then your money secures the loan, and by securing that loan with your money, then you can use other people's money. So once again, what if I were earning 6% on this whole tank over here? The entire tank was paying me 6%, and this money over here that I borrowed from a different financial institution was costing me 4%. Well, that's beautiful, because my money keeps growing at 6%, and I borrow somebody else's money at 4%. But even if it were 6% that I were being charged over here, it doesn't matter, because my money is still able to continue to grow and compound. And eventually, I will come along and I will pay off my loan, okay? And I will get rid of that collateral, or I will get rid of that lien that they put on my money, but my money kept growing that entire time. So here's what that would look like. My money never interrupted. The compounding never interrupted. And I simply borrowed other people's money. Now, I can't emphasize enough how big of an impact that makes, because the difference between a saver and a wealth creator could be a lot of money, okay, depending on the timing of all this and depending on the spread that you get on the loans and everything else. But that is a very significant difference to somebody's financial situation at the end of the day. And that, my friends, is not debt. That is what we call leverage, or OPM, other people's money. Okay? So what if I could show you a way to get some tax-free growth on your money, okay? Have access to it tax-free. Now, here's the cool part. I'm going to get here to I'm going to go and talk about this green tank one more time. I want to jump way ahead. Hang on just a sec. Okay, so this tank that we talk about and this savings that we talk about over here in this green bucket, we talk about this green bucket and the importance of filling this up so that we have access to it, so that we can avoid the two biggest mistakes people make with their money. Number one, we need to have access to it at all times. And number two, we need to not interrupt the compounding of that, which will allow us to do things like a 401 condo, which I'm going to go into next. But by doing that, I need to build up that safe green tank. So what kind of characteristics do we want in that safe green tank? Well, we would want that money to grow tax deferred. We would probably want to pull it out tax-free. We would probably want a competitive return. We would probably want high contribution limits. We would probably want to deduct those contributions. Now, you're probably already figuring out, in fact, I think we have a CPA on the call with us today, you're probably already figuring out that we're not going to be able to get a tax-deferred growth, tax-free distribution, and a deductible contribution because we'd have to live somewhere where the IRS couldn't find us. But these are all what we call the ideal characteristics. This is ideally what we would want. We would want collateral opportunities. We would want to use that money as collateral. We would want it to be safe from lawsuits, creditors, and bankruptcies. We would want to not lose any money in the market. We would want a guaranteed loan option so that we didn't have to worry about qualifying. And then, of course, we could have unstructured loan payments. You know, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Especially if we're going to buy a condo or something like that with that money. Sure would be nice to be able to determine how and when we pay for that. And then we could have liquidity use and control of that money anytime we want, and of course any other additional benefits. Now, all the different vehicles that are out there, some of them have more of these characteristics than others. And so talk to Jim and Kirti or myself, and we can kind of help you decide which vehicle would be best, you know, for that tank to be able to get the majority of these benefits. But, you know, I don't really want to get into specifics of investments today. I want to actually now go back and talk about kind of the topic that we wanted to talk about today, which is this 401 condo. Now, before I get into that, let's talk about your memories and your experiences that you've had with your 401ks. I don't know how many on the line here have a 401k, but a lot of times we might have some fond memories of the 401k, but there also might be some painful memories of that 401k. Like, for example, maybe in 2008 when you saw that big drop there, or maybe in 2000 to 2002 when you saw that big drop there. Now, but you may or may not enjoy your 401k. How about your wife? Does she enjoy your 401k? Is that something that you guys have really enjoyed together as a couple? How about your kids? Do your kids enjoy your 401k? Do they talk about it often? And do they have a lot of fond memories of your 401k? Well, how about a condo? What kind of memories do you think you could make at a condo? What kind of experiences do you think you would have sitting there in those chairs and looking out over the ocean? You know, how about your family and the memories that you have? Which one sounds more appealing? Now, this might be a dumb question, and we're just kind of having fun with this today to kind of show you how to think outside the box when it comes to investing your money. But is it possible that a condo could have similar qualities as a 401k and yet obviously be a lot more memorable and enjoyable? Well, let's go ahead and break it down. First of all, your condo is on the left and your 401k is on the right, obviously. And the first thing let's talk about is the value or the growth that you're going to get in the condo versus the 401k. I just showed you a minute ago, in the last 15 years, the S&P, which most 401ks do not keep up with the growth of the S&P. So I would argue that that was a best case scenario at about 2.5%. Let's just give you 4% to be nice and say that over a significant period of time, your actual rate of return, not your average, but your actual rate of return was about 4%, okay? Is it possible to have a real estate property appreciate at 4% as well? Absolutely. In fact, especially if it's a condo on the beach, they're not making any more beach property. So there might be some other, real estate that doesn't appreciate at 4%, but you could probably find a condo that appreciates at 8% or more. Now, Jim and Kirti are our resident experts on real estate, and so they can, of course, help you find the right real estate deal to get you the best return. But this could also be a rental property or a second home. This could be a cabin. You could have a 401 cabin. This is just to kind of talk about the benefits of, you know, some real estate and thinking outside the box here. Now, that we can kind of look at, but I would argue that they are both potentially going to grow at the same rate. Now, when you finally get to the ripe old age of 59 and a half, you can finally get access to that 401k. And now that you have access to it, you can start to enjoy it a little bit more, because all those years of accumulating money, you probably didn't enjoy it a whole heck of a lot because you couldn't, you know, actually use it or tap into it. And so you're finally going to accumulate, you know, that 401k, and now it's worth, let's say it's now worth $1 million. It grew it at 4%, and now you can actually spend it or enjoy it. Now, I would actually have to sell, you know, my condo, my 401 condo, to be able to actually spend that cash, because if my condo grew to be worth $1 million, then I would have to sell it for the $1 million to be able to have that money and to be able to spend, you know, to be able to spend that money just like I could spend my 401k money. So that's going to be kind of similar. I could still have the value, or I could still have the dollar, you know, equivalency of, let's say, $1 million, just for easy math. Now, is it possible? A lot of people like the tax advantages of a 401k, and yes, there are some tax advantages of a 401k because the money goes in pre-tax. So we looked earlier about the little tube that takes the money from, you know, earned income into the 401k without having to pay taxes. Now, do you have to pay taxes later? Yes. So you are just deferring the taxes until later, but you do have that tax deferred growth. Now, on a 401 condo, of course, we're going to go out and use other people's money. Remember, we just talked about that a minute ago. So I am going to go and I'm going to get a mortgage. How long am I going to get that mortgage for? I'm going to get that mortgage for 30 years, not 15 years. You want to know why they give you a 3.5% on a 15-year mortgage instead of a 4.5% on a 30-year mortgage? They call that bait. I don't know if any of you like to fish, but the banks call that bait. They're going to give you a 1% benefit to give them an extra $1,000 a month. And then they're going to take that $1,000 a month and they are going to loan it out to somebody else on a credit card. Yes. Kirti just wanted to know if we have some questions. If we have some questions, yes, let's definitely go through some questions here. Do we have some questions? Let's see here. Okay, any questions on your end there, Kirti?
Okay. Yes, I think that Paul has a question. Okay. He has his hand raised.
Okay,
Shall I unmute him?
Oh, he's saying louder. Please. Let me see if he can hear us. Okay, I've got you. What is a 401 condo? Okay, good question. So a 401 condo does not exist. It's just a made-up kind of a fun thing that we are talking about that kind of explains the difference between a 401k and buying a condo. So there actually isn't something technically called a 401 condo. It's just a condo is all it really is buying a condo. And then we're just kind of looking at the difference between buying a condo and having a 401k. So just kind of a play on words, I guess, if you will. But great question. I should have clarified that a little bit better. Any other questions? Okay, Kirti, go ahead and keep watching those questions. Feel free to ask as many questions as you guys want, and we can stop anytime and go over those. Okay, so if we get a mortgage for that condo, then do we get to deduct? And now, of course, different situations for different people, but generally speaking, are we going to be able to deduct that mortgage interest? And generally, yes, we would. We'd be able to deduct that mortgage interest. So if all we are looking for in a 401k is kind of a tax deduction or a way to get our money into the 401k without paying taxes on that money, well, I could do the same thing with my condo payment. So if I go pick up, let's say I'm putting $1,000, let's say I'm going to pay $1,000 into my 401k versus $1,000 on a mortgage payment for my condo, the majority of that is going to be interest on my mortgage payment. So I am going to be able to deduct that interest. So the reason why, we want to get a 30-year mortgage instead of a 15-year mortgage is because if we could have our money growing uninterrupted at 6% or so, then we could use other people's money. A lot of mortgages, of course, we could get for maybe 4.5%. Consult, of course, a mortgage officer, but we can get 4.5%, which is cheaper than our money. So we don't want to pay cash for it in this particular scenario, so we get to deduct that mortgage interest. Now, the other thing is that a 401k limits how much you can put into it. So we could buy as many condos or pay as much as we wanted to for our condo. So we actually have an unlimited contribution limit on my condo versus my 401k. So there are limits. Now, I talked about this earlier, but you probably don't have any pictures or memories of your 401k. This isn't something that your family has probably enjoyed. You probably haven't, you probably have, spend a lot of time even really talking about it. But in the condo scenario, it's much more enjoyable. In fact, we just talked about a minute ago that you can't even enjoy your 401k until you retire. So you've got all those years, 30-plus years, you might be accumulating money into that 401k without actually being able to enjoy it, because what happens if you do? If you tap into it, you get penalized. So you're actually not even you're not even allowed to enjoy it the entire time you're accumulating it. But we could have memories and pictures and all sorts of experiences in our condo. It could be something that we could definitely enjoy. Now, do we get any bonus checks with the 401k? No. In fact, we can't just even go in and tap into it until, of course, they allow us to. But could you rent out your condo? Now, even if you didn't rent it out, it's still going to appreciate. And even if you just used it for your family to go down and visit, then that would be fine. But could you rent it out? Could you rent it out and make additional income? Now, is that income taxable? Yes, it's taxable as ordinary income. But could you get a little extra bonus by renting out your condo with, for rental income? Absolutely. Are there any penalties to use that condo along the way? Of course not. You can go and use the condo, every weekend if you'd like to. Right? There's no limit to how often you take advantage of that condo, which sounds silly, I know. But remember, there are penalties if you get to your money prior to 59.5 with your 401k. So you really are, restricted to not even be able to use it that whole time. Now, what happens when you pass away? What happens to your 401k? This is one of the things that I think is very important to understand, because I talk to a lot of people, and a lot of times this doesn't click. Because let's say you have $1 million. You definitely don't consider yourself to be rich, because if you're just living on the interest, then you're probably not taking out more than 4%, I would hope, because we just looked a minute ago and we saw that in the last 15 years, the interest was really only about 2.5% in the last 15 years. So you shouldn't be taking out any more than 4%. In fact, Wall Street Journal just said don't take out more than 2%, was the latest study that they released. So let's say you have $1 million and you're living off $20,000 to $40,000 a year. Well, you probably don't consider yourself rich if you're living off $20,000 to $40,000 a year in retirement off that 401k. However, when the two of you, and a lot of times, of course, that money can be passed to a spouse, but let's just say you're both gone, that 401k is now considered income in the year of your death. Okay? So if you had $1 million and you were living off the interest, in the year that you died, that $1 million would be added to your income for that year. Now, there are things called stretch IRAs and things like that, but for the majority, for this conversation, you are going to have taxes. You're going to have some possible estate taxes, depending on what the laws are at the time. There's going to be death taxes. But most importantly, that money has not been taxed yet. Because if we go back over here and we look at that tank, remember that that tank, if all of your money is in a 401k, it doesn't matter whether you bring that out on an annual basis or whether, and just spread it out over 20, 30, 40 years, or whether it all comes out in 1 year. There is still a portion of that that belongs to the IRS. And if you die, the remaining balance is considered income that year. So now you hear a lot of people that say, hey, let's tax the wealthy. Let's tax the wealthy because it doesn't apply to me. I'm only living off 20 to 40 grand a year. I'm not wealthy. Well, the year that you die, your income would show $1 million. So now you could potentially be at a 40% tax bracket, and that could go up in the future, but you could be at a 40% tax bracket, which means with death tax and everything else, there's a very good chance that half of that money could be gone before it even hits your kids or your charity, whoever you're wanting to leave that money to. Now, let's just say that you leave half of that. Let's say you leave $500,000 to your kid. Let's say you have an only child, or you have one child. If you leave $500,000 to that child, is that considered income? Absolutely. So now your kid has to pay taxes on that $500,000. That is considered income. I have some friends who inherited some money from when their family sold some land in Hawaii, and they were so excited they took their $200,000 that they got as an inheritance, and they went out and put a huge down payment on their house and bought 2 cars with cash. And then come tax time, after the money was already gone, they realized that they had to pay taxes on that money. So they ended up putting it on a credit card, which got them behind. Long story short, once again, not having access to money can put you in a tough predicament. So it's very important to understand that when you die, your 401k is going to be taxed significantly. Okay? So be aware of that. Now, with real estate or with your condo, you're going to get a step up in basis. Your kids, I should say, are going to get a step up in basis. So not a bad deal, is it? Not a bad investment. And of course, this is one of my favorite ones. If we rent out our condo, we have to show that money as income. But could you trade a weekend at your condo for a weekend at your friend's cabin? Absolutely. Why not? No money ever exchanges hands. You don't have to pay taxes on that at all. You just get, additional benefits by being able to trade. Now, could you trade for some other good or service? What if you have, a connection with someone that does some website development, and you would like to trade a couple of, weekends or a couple of weeks in your condo for some services where they do some website development for you, for example. Or let's say that you have somebody that has some goods, and somebody owns a business that has some goods, and you would like to get those goods in exchange for some time in your condo. No money ever changes hands. You got an extra benefit there that, of course, you're not going to get with a 401k. And last but not least is probably the one thing that I focus on the most is the control. Having control of your money. You can sell that condo anytime you want. Okay? You are completely in control of that. Now, the problem with a 401k that I run into is that the majority of Americans have all their money in their house with the equity in their house, which actually isn't their equity. The equity, until the house is paid for, the equity actually belongs to the bank. I have I know several people right now that, well, for example, I'll give you one example of a gal that I'm working with right now who has a ton of equity in her house, but she's a couple months behind on her mortgage payment. Even though she only has $30,000 left to pay on her mortgage, she's a couple months behind. Is it possible that if she got behind and they decided to foreclose on her, and they could sell that house for $31,000? Absolutely. They are only required to sell the house for what you owe them, which means the $200,000 of equity could be gone, and the next person that maybe gets it at a killer deal on an auction is the one that's going to benefit from that equity, not you. So it's very important that if all of your money is in your 401k, or if all of your money is in equity in your house, you don't have control of that. And so when it comes time for, an unexpected expense, or maybe you're in between jobs and you can't get to that money, then that's why we have almost 50% of Americans cashing out a 401k in between jobs, because they need access to that money. And when you do that, of course, you get the taxes and penalties, and so it ends up giving you about half of your money. That is the challenge. Now, is it a vehicle? Yes. A 401k is just another vehicle to save money. Could you potentially get a match? Absolutely. Do you have to consider that? Yes. But are you contributing more than what they're matching? A lot of companies only match up to 3% or 6%. You're never going to retire if all you're saving is 3 to 6% of your income. So at some point you're going to have to save more than what the company is matching. So you need to consider all aspects of this. This is, this webinar today was just to kind of talk about some outside the box thinking when it comes to investing your money. And a lot of times we just get into this, rut of thinking that a 401k, because that's what the work offers us. We get a new job that comes with benefits, so we get all excited, and we think that it's going to be the solution to all of our problems. I think that we just need to understand how they work and understand that we are not saving taxes. We are just postponing taxes until later. If we do get a match, then we do have to consider that, and that's something to consider. But a condo that might cost us, $500-600 a month, $1,000 a month, maybe we get a few of them, we're paying $3,000 a month. Whatever the situation is, we're still investing. We are still investing with a potential, similar return as that 401k. So having control is a very big factor. With that, Kirti, do we have any questions on your end?
No. We've had a few questions, Lance, but we've been answering those as you've been going along. So right now, all the questions I think are caught up.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, hopefully this has been helpful. Hopefully everyone can kind of see how this works. Now, Jim and Kirti, they have excellent resources when it comes to real estate and understanding real estate. I also, once again, suggest that you contact a CPA or your local, whoever your accountant is, and just make sure that you understand the ins and outs of how it applies to you and your situation. Everyone is different. Everyone's tax situation is different. Everyone's financial situation is different. The one thing that I need to also just end with is that you don't want to get yourself in a position where you have this mortgage on a condo and you don't have access to money, and then you lose your job and you can't afford to make that payment on the condo, and the same kind of situation happens that I just explained a minute ago, where you lose all that equity and you lose, kind of a lot of that savings. There's no difference than cashing out a 401k if you have to sell a condo, and take a big hit, or if you lose the condo and you have to take a big hit. So in either scenario, a 401k or a 401 condo, in either scenario, you need to have access to money. And you need to have access to money for not only those unexpected expenses, but also for those future opportunities. Because I would sure hope that everyone gets themselves in a position to where the next time we have a 2008, or we don't even have to wait for another 2008. There's good deals all the time that come up, you know, in foreclosure situations or in auctions or in just people that, once again, since the two biggest mistakes people make with their money is not having access to it, you will always run into someone who needs to sell something to desperately get cash in a hurry. And so anytime somebody else is in that position, you could take advantage of it if you had access to the money and to your money. So with that, if there's not any other questions, we will go ahead and wrap up. I hope you guys have a great day, that you in Texas, that you all stay warm, and that you're safe out there on those roads. And it was fun having you all on board, and God bless. Take care.